You're listening to Hillary Simply, and I'm your host, Hillary. In the words of Albert Einstein, I have no special talents. I'm just passionately curious. So let's get curious, unpopular, and honest on endless topics together.
You know, you don't have to see too many people come in a wheelchair and leave walking to shift your gears. You know, I still love jiu-jitsu. I'm still involved. But the thing I love about both of them is that it's a chance to change lives, you know, and at the hospital, we're literally pulling people out of the grave. It used to be, I remember we were talking about this not like maybe a year ago, you know, when somebody would get out of a wheelchair and walk and like get that back, it was like, oh my God, like, ooh, praise the Lord, you know?
Yeah.
Now it happens so frequent. You're like, okay, great.
Like, hey,
you know what I
happy
mean?
Tuesday.
So,
yeah. Well, that's a good thing to have happening so often.
As far as like, God, I'm trying to think what the most profound things are. I'll tell you one of them. That's an interesting one, and it's around faith.
Okay.
And so, you know, having been there literally like in the last seconds, the last minutes, the last hours of so many different people's lives. I work on the floor with the patients myself. Myself and Sarah Peterson, we teach a class there called Power of the Mind, where we work on coaching and focusing the mind, meditation and goal setting, things like that for the patients, a lot like we would do for a martial arts person, for a fighter. And I really started to realize, you know, I grew up Christian, you know, but didn't really ever go to church or anything like that. I really started to notice the difference between somebody who had a very strong faith and somebody who didn't. And the calmness, the okayness with their own passing, the difference between somebody who had and we've had every different faith come down there, you know.
Yeah. It's just
believing in a higher
power.
And believing in a higher power gives them power in those final moments of their life, whether it's a month, a week, a day, an hour, a minute, that the person who doesn't have that faith doesn't have. And so spending so much time with I love my patients. There's nothing I like more than going to the cafeteria, sitting down at lunch with them, or sharing a meditation with them, teaching the class, just going to their rooms and checking in on them. Unfortunately, we have patients that come alone. They don't have a companion that can come with them. So I spend more time with those people. And that's probably one of the craziest things for me, to just like really start to put that together. And then also that same MD Anderson oncologist that came to work with us shared with me a very similar experience for himself. And he actually wrote a book about it. And he said, you know, imagine being an oncologist for 30 years and pretty much 100% of your patients die, right? Like maybe 3% make it. And over again, you're losing these people. And that was something that he really, that he took away from too. He's like, oh, funny you should say that. I wrote a book about it, you know, like
oh my gosh,
a very similar thing. So that's probably one of the more profound things. And the other one is really the actual power of the mind. Our original medical director that opened the hospital with Charlotte Gerson back in the day, he's since retired. You know, he told me very early on in working in the hospital, he said, I can tell in the first 30 minutes whether or not a patient has a chance to make it. I was like, really? And he said, yes. You know, he goes, it really, you know, depended upon their mentalness. Like if they were a fighter and they were mentally prepared to fight, because they're going to see some of their worst days before they get better.
Yeah.
All the detox and everything that they got to do. First week is usually hell for patients, but then it gets better. And the ones that don't have that mental fortitude to fight through it, he said he could tell spot right away.
Can you tell now?
Yes. And from doing that, what I've learned how to do is I make that my goal. I make that my goal to figure out how to coach them to be a fighter. So I was never a Dominic Cruz or any one of these guys. Like, you know, I fought in the Worlds once, you know, I didn't win. I have a funny story about that I share with the patients. But I have been in a lot of fights. I fought in a lot of tournaments. I've been around high level guys to see where their mental game is. And so in developing this Power of the Mind class with Sarah Peterson, and Robin helped us a lot too, I really look for that. Like, do they have this fighter mindset? Now, you know, fighters, It's something you can be trained to do. Are they open to being trained into it? And then Ed gave me a book called, I might butcher this, but I think it's Man's Search for Meaning. Is it Victor Hugo?
I feel like I've heard about this book.
The book is basically about a psychologist that was in a concentration camps in Nazi Germany.
Yes.
And to keep his patients, his fellow prisoners from committing suicide, it boiled down to he had to figure out one of two things. Either who they had to get out of this concentration camp to see, or what they absolutely had to finish in their lives, a project or something like that. And he literally would keep notes hidden inside of his prison uniform so that when he saw a fellow prisoner slipping and he thought they might want to take their own life, then knew he could go over and say, "What about your daughter? Your daughter's waiting." And that would snap him out of. So he would find those trigger points. So that's what I spend a lot of my time in my class doing and finding out from patients. Now, patients who have children, it's always a lot easier, but the ones that don't, not necessarily as much. But even if it's just the children, well, what else is important to you? So we had a patient that came down to our hospital, and his name was Ryan. If I showed you a picture of what he looked like when he first came in, I literally had to turn my eyes away from him because I thought for sure this guy's going to die in the hospital.
Oh, no.
But I spent some time with him. I got to know him, and I found out what his why was, right? His why. And it was, I want to walk my daughter down the aisle.
Oh.
And so Ryan spent quite a bit of time with us, and he had to come back because he had a relapse. He actually ate a burrito. He thought he was better, ate a burrito, and it almost killed him. And so on days when he didn't want to do his treatments, and they're rough. These treatments are rough for people. I would one day I literally opened the door and I said, "Hey, cool. I heard you're not doing your treatments. So, what do you want me to walk your daughter down the aisle? What should I tell her? Like why you're not there?" And he got so mad. Our patients drink juices, fresh juices, and whipped the juice at me at the door. He missed, what I mean? But he was so pissed. But he started doing his treatments again. And so what I really work to find out with my patients is, what's your why? I have them write it down, tell the other patients, post it on the internet, make a declaration, tell everybody, what it is, so that when you're on that rough day, if I'm not there or somebody is there, they can say, "Hey, who's going to walk your daughter down the aisle?"
Yeah.
And that helps. It's the same thing in fighting, when you're get in a fight camp, if you're in a fight camp to win your fight, you got to get beat up every day, and it's easy to want to quit. But do you want to be champ or not? A good coach is going to get in your face and say,
like, "What are you doing?
You want to quit? Then quit. What was the whole point? Why'd you even take the fight? Just give up now. Quit." And it's the same exact thing. These cancer patients are in the fight of their life, and they need coaches.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting about that is it wasn't like you sat down and you're like, "Well, don't you want to walk your daughter down the aisle?" Like, you made it very matter of fact for him.
Oh, I screamed in his face.
How many people would do that?
Well, we joke about it now. I still work with Ryan. I'm friends with him, and he's like, "Hey man," he's like, "Sorry, I threw that juice at you." I'm like, "I'm not sorry at all. Look at where you're at. You're alive. You don't have cancer anymore." So, if you would have gave up that day.
Yeah. Well, and so did he walk his daughter down the aisle?
Not yet. She's not old enough. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So he's got a ways to go. Even.
He has plenty of time to live.
Well, I think that's awesome. I think that's awesome that you would do that. I think that I feel like a lot of people, especially around sensitive topics like that, death in particular, will tiptoe around things instead of just...
There's no tiptoeing around death. It happens all the time in our hospital.
If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a comment or like. And as always, stay passionately curious.